19, verses 1 to 4, and 28 to 29. Give thanks to the Lord, because he is good. His love is eternal. Let the people of Israel say his love is eternal. Let the priests of God say his love is eternal. Let all who worship him say his love is eternal. The last two verses. You are my God, and I give you thanks. I will proclaim your greatness. Give thanks to the Lord, because he is good, and his love is eternal. For many churches, this is a season of harvest thanksgiving. The churches are decorated with fruits, vegetables, and non-perishable items that may be distributed to those in need. Decorations include colorful croton leaves, bunches of bananas, stalks of sugar cane, and other local produce. Often the tools of various trades are included, representing the labor of so many in our land. We have lost lives over this year that brings waves of grief like never before. We have lost homes and businesses, public buildings, and privately owned properties as well. The calculations are in the billions. This is a staggering sum of money for a small island state. We will have to work long and hard, thinking out of the box, out of the bag, and out of any other container that might stifle creativity. We give thanks with a heavy heart. Let us consider where to begin. Let us give thanks to God for Jesus on the cross, a suffering Messiah, a suffering servant who teaches us what love looks like. Let us give thanks for a risen Savior who gives us hope that there is more to life than life on earth. Let us give thanks for the comforting Holy Spirit who is always with us to strengthen us for the journey. Let us give thanks for loving family and friends, or those who truly care for us and want to see us succeed. Let us give thanks for the freedoms we enjoy, to worship, to assemble, to vote, to travel, to own property, etc. Let us give thanks for democratic process, for ability to make choices, to aspire to hold high office, to engage in various professions, and for tertiary education. Let us thank God for our leaders in church and state, in civic organizations and local charities. Let us thank God for our uniqueness and the special contributions we each are called to make, and the personal giftedness to accomplish great things in our lifetime. Let us find beauty where we can. Let us find joy where we can. Let us find hope where we can. Let us keep the faith. Let us show love. And let us sow seeds of kindness. We pray for you in this honorable house to use your power and influence to chart a new course for our nation, a path of recovery and restoration, a national transformation. May we all contribute to this great work. Join me, please, in our family prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Brent Simonet, Desmond Bannister, Brentwood Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Dr. Dwayne Sand, Marvin Dames, Frankie Campbell, Nicio Diagula, Michael Pintard, Darren Henfield, Ramon Ferreira, Lanisha Rule, Renzel Rule, Ellsworth Johnson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Lakeisha Parker Edgecombe, Aram Lewis, Carlton Bolag, James Albury, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Sanders, Frederick McAlpine, Hank Johnson, Mark Hume, Michael Folks, Miriam Reckley Emmanuel, Reese Chipman, Ruben Raming, Ricky Mackey, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, Chanel Ferguson, Glennis Hannah Martin, Feiswell Forbes, Chester Cooper.
Good morning, honorable members. Honorable members, I have in my possession several letters from a number of parliaments, expressions of condolences with respect to the passage of Hurricane Dorian, and for the lives lost and for those who went missing during that catastrophic hurricane. The first letter that I wish to table is from the Speaker of the House of Representatives from the House of Parliament of Jamaica. Order that the document do lie on the table. The second letter of condolence is from the Parliament of Canada. Order that the document do lie on the table. And the third letter of condolences, an expression of support, is from the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Order that the document do lie on the table. Also, honorable members, today we have a number of distinguished persons who are here with us in the gallery. We have a number of sports legends and persons who have been inducted into the Sports Hall of Fame. We have some great athletes among us within this parliament itself, and one particular athlete who has carried the Bahamas flag real strong for a number of years in an international competition is our member from Foxhill, who has a number of you, I understand, may have coached her and assisted her along the way. And so we'll begin. We'll begin with the member for Foxhill. The chair now recognizes the honorable member for Foxhill.
Speaker, thank you, colleagues. You can do it again. Mr. Speaker, it warms my heart to see these sports legends here in the House of Assembly. You raise the bar today. You make us look good. You make us feel good. You made the country feel good. It is a season, as Reverend Palacia said, of harvest thanksgiving. You gave the country the harvest of your talents, and we are eternally grateful for that. This is our time to say thank you. Harvest Thanksgiving time can't be more perfect than this. You're all wonderful. You all took the nation on your shoulder. You gave a nation hope. You told us, yes, we can. Now, all of you are special. But to me, I spoke in this house just after the hurricane and after the World Championship. I talked about the honor that was given to Ronald Cartwright by the IAAF for all of the wonderful work he's done. I told the story of how he would come from Stapleton Garden to Fox Hill, something like 5 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Pick me up, pick up Linda Woodside, take us to Goodman's Bay, work our behinds off, take us back home to Fox Hill. All this before school and all before he went to work. So Ronald Cartwright, thank you. I was a little whippersnapper. I weighed about 90-some pounds, and I wore Converse high heels. But there was somebody who took me under her arm and said, "This is how you do it." Cora, thank you. I think she doesn't even remember that. And the Ferguson, Pratt, Conyers family has given a lot to this nation. You all thought it was only me. But there's my cousin right there, Jackie Conyers. And there are more on the pipeline and more currently working. So, athletes, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair now recognizes the Honorable Member for Seabreeze, who is the Minister with responsibility for sports.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and good morning. Coming behind the member for Fox Hill makes it so easy for me. I feel a part of the family. They tell me a song many years ago, all of you are one family. All of you are one. And so even though I did not make it first, second, or third place on the track, when I tried, you know, today I tell them I have my sports jacket, and so all of you are one. But Mr. Speaker, just very briefly, I thank you for this opportunity. An anonymous writer is quoted as saying, "Champions rarely talk, they just perform, and the world around them talks." Mr. Speaker, the work and activities of the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture, as many may know, is extensive. It has been described by many as never-ending. And as we seek to navigate the most sensitive or dynamic groupings within our population, being that of youth, the sporting and cultural communities respectively, we do not see our challenges as obstacles but opportunities to grow, to learn, and develop our nation and indeed our people. Mr. Speaker, during the month of October, our nation celebrated Youth Month. The Division of Youth and its dynamic team of officers hosted a series of activities to celebrate and recognize and encourage the future of our nation. This month, Mr. Speaker, the country now celebrates National Sports Heritage Month, which will be followed by National Cultural Heritage Month throughout December. Mr. Speaker, by proclamation, the Most Honorable Prime Minister has once again graciously declared the month of November as Sports Heritage Month. This is the time when my ministry pauses to recognize the many outstanding accomplishments of our athletes, both past and present, who've excelled and achieved milestones over the years in the field of sports. Their successes have and continue to abound to the good of the entire country. It strengthens our reputation, the world's perception of us, and in many ways magnifies our image beyond our physical limitations. Mr. Speaker, greatness is among us this morning. Today I am proud to talk and to share and to showcase to this nation and the world our champions, Bahamas grown. Mr. Speaker, I would like to pause here to repeat an analogy that was used by the principal of Queen's College during an award ceremony last week, Friday. He used the illustration of the bumblebee. He said the bumblebee has small wings. And because of this, the bumblebee has to work much harder, having those small wings, to be able to fly among the other insects. They have to work very hard to do their job and to keep themselves running with the pack. Mr. Speaker, today, notwithstanding our nation may be small in size, these men and women, we must consider would have had to have worked extremely hard to be able to compete, not only to compete, but to be able to win and to shine in the world around us. Mr. Speaker, they have worked much harder, and yet they got the job done. We came to celebrate them today. Mr. Speaker, now is that time we recognize, and I call them important people. And these great men and women sit in the gallery of this great chamber. In collaboration, Mr. Speaker, with the sports federations, the Ministry of Sports have identified and selected a group of outstanding sportsmen and women who have made a meaningful and valuable contribution to the development of the country through sports. These outstanding individuals have been nominated for induction into the National Sports Hall of Fame. Our honorees for this year's induction include Ali Kulma for softball, Jackie Conyers for volleyball, Paul Wong, bodybuilding, Raymond Tucker, bodybuilding, Ray Wiley, bodybuilding, M. Ambrose Guthrow, golf, Ronald Cartwright, or the famous Ronald Cartwright, track and field, Linda Davis, basketball, Stansell Stoney Ferguson, basketball, Basil the Kid Sands, basketball, what's your cousin? Prince Zorro Stubbs, golf, and posthumously, Walter Callender, track and field. Mr. Speaker, this year our Sports Month theme is Champions Among Us. Locally grown, globally known. This theme, Mr. Speaker, speaks directly to the achievements of these individuals whom we celebrate today. Among our honorees is Mr. Ronald Cartwright, the member for Fox Hill would have pointed out, who most recently returned from Doha, Qatar, where he received international recognition by the International Association of Athletic Associations and awarded the IAAF Veterans Pin for his over 40 years of committed development to track and field. Among our honorees is Alfred Ali Kulma, coach of numerous world-beating softball teams, and all the others, Mr. Speaker, in the gallery whose accomplishments are nothing short of remarkable. I am honored for this opportunity to present our honorees and prospective class of 2019 to this honorable house today. The official induction ceremony will be held at Government House under the patronage of the Governor General, the Most Honorable Cornelius A. Smith, on the 3rd of December 2019. I invite as many members of the House to attend. All members should receive your invitations shortly, and you should have received invites to the other activities in celebration of Sports Heritage Month. Mr. Speaker, another special feature of the month is the annual Sports Awards. This momentous occasion and event allows the Department of Sports, on behalf of the government of the Bahamas, to recognize our active athletes who continue to carry on the work of their predecessors in sports and carry the Bahamian flag with pride and indeed distinction. This event will be held this Friday at the Atlantis Resort Crown Ballroom. A number of categories of awards will be presented during that time and ultimately will culminate with the overall Athlete of the Year who will be identified. It is my honor to be the first, Mr. Speaker, to publicly congratulate all of the selected persons here and their families, and to also take this time to thank Mr. Speaker, the Director of Sports, Mr. Timothy Munnings, who is in the gallery, and the hardworking team in the Department of Sports, some who are also here with us, for their continued work and commitment to the sports community on behalf of the people of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture, and on behalf of the people of the Bahamas, I congratulate each and every one of our athletes, coaches, and team members of the sporting community, both past and present, for their efforts and sacrifices to the national development of sports in the Bahamas. I congratulate the inductees of the 2019 class of Sports Hall of Fame. May the good Lord continue to favor the Bahamian sports community, and may he continue to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, one or two of them there might remember my days. One or two of them. As a speaker, it's indeed my distinct pleasure and privilege to be here at this time, at this moment, and to have this privilege to extend well wishes, congratulations to those who were honored to be inducted in the Bahamas Hall of Fame. I too one time thought about being a Hall of Famer. but alas, I could, I could sit back and say to myself that those who are in the Hall of Fame, I knew well, and perhaps at some point in time did something with them. Played softball or run around the basketball court or something with them. And so that gives me pleasure as well. And so, Mr. Speaker, as we were reminded, and I think the member for Foxhill also reminded us, that this is harvest Thanksgiving season. Now, harvest is, much comes before the harvest. Much comes before the harvest. You have to clear the land, toil the soil, till the soil, plant the seeds, water them, nurture it, of course. And if you do that all with what I call love, again, something that came from our word today, you'll find that your harvest will be bountiful. And what did you say? Huh? What did you say? Yeah. So see the retort, Mr. Speaker. My response to that is this. The word power was also mentioned this morning. The word power was also mentioned this morning. And sometimes, many of us who sit in this place love power. Many of us here love power. Right? But as I said, much comes before the harvest. And it's not loving power that helps a bountiful harvest, but rather the power of love that does it. Right? The power of love that does it. And so I remind us all about the fact that much comes before the harvest, because it is necessary for us who are here to ensure we who could assure a bountiful harvest to do so. Let's play our part in tilling the soil, nurturing talent to ensure that we do have at the end of the day a bountiful harvest. And in this end, I would want to just remind us all, let's do the things that build up the common good to ensure that our harvest is bountiful. Let us put aside the egos and the narcissist views on I am in charge and therefore this is how it must go. Allow them to do what they want to do.
Stay focused,
And so, I'm talking about us now. I'm talking about us. We have a role to play. And I'm trying to ensure that our harvest, we have a bountiful harvest at the end of the day. And the only way, I'm commending them. We commend them. And we need to do some things.
You're in a long route.
Scenic routing. No. Speaker, I know. See, I just don't talk this. I just don't talk this. I do it, and I show my love for this. I don't brag about it. We don't do it, but you do it, and the time has come. And so I take my hat off to all of you, and I take my, and more specifically, the Coach Ronald Cartwright, who is one of those what I call he's the farmer that assures the harvest. And I think he is one of those we could hold up to show that his harvest has been bountiful. And he has demonstrated what we ought to be doing. We ought to be identifying talent and nurturing. And I think that's where we must put more emphasis. And we need now to go out there in the islands and find our talent and let us do it. And so I take my hat off to all of you. I single out Ronald Cartwright. I noticed that Melvin Ambrose is not here, Cutthroat. But I also take my hat off to him, who was one of the Hall of Famers in golfing. I was just calling the other names because all of you, I know somehow, and I don't want to. But we thank you for what you've done for us. We thank you for being the example you are to others who will come behind. Continue your work, and I know that they all are continuing. When I went to the softball championship the other night, who was walking around there still? Ali Kalma. He's not giving up, he's still contributing the best he can. And that's what we ask of all each member. Stay in the sport, be the example that you have been, and continue to do so. Congratulations.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Members, when I think of Hall of Fame, I think of longevity in a sport, a distinguished career, a body of work by these individuals that have separated them and distinguished them in their particular area. And since we are beginning to single out people, I would like to single out my former coach, Stancil Stoney Ferguson, who was not only a basketball player and a champion at the sport as a player, he was also a national coach and a coach that led a team that I played on to the Triple Crown national champion, the Bex Cougars. And so I want to congratulate all of you. I see a number of familiar faces from volleyball in particular and basketball. You know, those were my favorite sports. And I also love track and field. So you have represented us well. You have shown the commitment and the dedication that it takes to achieve the honor that you're now receiving. And we congratulate you. Also with us today is another group of distinguished persons. Of course, this month has been declared Deaf Awareness Month for the entire month of November. We've already passed one of the events, that is the International Men's Day, which was Tuesday, the 19th of November. And there are a number of events, one actually today, the Universal Children's Day, and the other event to come, National Women's Week, which is November 24th through 30th. And at this time, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores, who is the minister with responsibility for social services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today, the 20th of November, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas joins other countries around the world to celebrate World Children's Day. It's a day set aside to promote international togetherness and awareness among children worldwide and improving children's welfare. World Children's Day was first celebrated in 1954 as Universal Children's Day and is celebrated on the 20th of November each year to mark the anniversary of the adoption of the United Nations General Assembly of the Declaration of the Rights of the Child in 1959 and the adoption of the Convention of the Rights of the Child in 1989. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child has set out a number of children's rights, including the right to life, to health, to education, and to play, as well as the right to family life and to be protected from violence, not to be discriminated against, and to have their views heard. Now, Mr. Speaker, you and I would have come from that generation where children were to be seen and not to be heard.
Yes.
But today, we stand speaking of the right of a child to be heard. This convention was signed and ratified by more nations than any other human rights treaty, attesting to its global significance and the underlying universal values it holds. World Children's Day is an opportunity for children and adults to advocate, promote, and celebrate children's rights. It is important for our children to be taught about their rights and their value to society. If our children know their rights, Mr. Speaker, and know that those rights are valued and they are treated with respect, they are more likely to see themselves in that light and to treat others the same way. Mr. Speaker, in the Bahamas and around the world, every year, hundreds of children become the victims of violence or face various forms of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Their ethnic background, religious affiliation, and social status does not protect them from suffering from the atrocities of war, poverty, discrimination, and disease. Mr. Speaker, my ministry is honored to work with many government agencies and non-governmental groups to protect the children of the Bahamas. For example, the National Child Protection Council, in conjunction with the Urban Renewal Project of Bain and Grantstown, work together to prevent abuse and neglect, to ensure that victims of violence are supported and that justice is ensured. I also wish to recognize and commend the work of Dr. C.B. Morse and Bahamas Against Crime, who has an ongoing program to sensitize persons in the community and throughout the Bahamas on the need to prevent and eradicate violence and abuse against children. I wish to express my deepest gratitude to all those who partner with the ministry and its departments to advocate on behalf of children of the Bahamas, who provide solutions to challenges faced by children, and who bring awareness to children of their rights to live in a friendly and safe world where they can reach their full potential. Mr. Speaker, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The Bahamas, like other countries of the world, have planned events to celebrate our commitment to our children's well-being. Yesterday, on the 19th of November, a pop-up festival was held at Columbus Primary School, where fifth graders from that school were joined by students from the Stapleton School and students from the Palmdale Primary School in a day of fun-filled activities. Students learned about various emotions and how to express them. The pop-up festival was manned by representatives from the Ministry of Education School Psychological Services Unit, the Bahamas National Drug Council, the Royal Bahamas Police Force Crime Prevention Unit and Drug Enforcement Unit, the Government High School Guidance Department, the Department of Social Services, Gender and Family Affairs, and Children Protection Unit, the Ministry of Health, school nurses, and the Suspected Child Abuse Neglect Unit. I commend Dr. Carter who is chair of the National Child Protection Council, for a job well done. I commend her team for their support. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas Trafficking in Persons Task Force has also been doing an excellent job in raising awareness about the dangers of child trafficking since January of this year. They visited a number of schools, both private and public, role-playing, ensuring that there is an appreciation for and an understanding of the dangers that our children might be vulnerable to relative to child trafficking. I'm pleased to say that thus far, they have reached and spoken to more than 4,000 children throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. As a minister who's committed to ensure that our work is not New Providence-centric, I will join a team tomorrow in visiting North Eleuthera to continue activities relative to this subject. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to have with us in the gallery the Director of Social Services, Lillian Quant-Forbes, and staff from our department, also the Chair of the National Child Protection Council, Dr. Carter Lukey. And the entire team are here with us, Mr. Speaker. I want to express my gratitude to them publicly for their continued support and their hard work. Mr. Speaker, they have enabled me to speak publicly with confidence, with the kind of braggadocious attitude that I love, because I'm satisfied that when I speak based on their advice, I will be well-spoken and well-received. Mr. Speaker, it is interesting that as we celebrate our legends, we are also speaking of our children. And I wish to join the good member for Cat Island as he talks about preparing the soil for the harvest. And so we see the harvest and we speak of the soil. I invite Bahamians everywhere to join us in ensuring that our children are sufficiently prepared for the day, which I know is very soon, that we will hand the baton to them, that they will continue the work that has been started by our legends and continue to ensure that, small though we may be in size, the flag of the Bahamas will continue to fly high and will continue to bring us the kind of pride that we get when we see it. Mr. Speaker, I join my colleagues in commending the legends. I pray that God will continue to bless our legends and our young persons as he continues to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Angliston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I want to join my colleague from Southern Shores and the Minister responsible for Social Services and Children's Affairs in commemorating the 30th anniversary of the accession to the Convention on the Protection of Children at the United Nations. And, you know, there are many cliches that speak about our children, which are probably so worn, Mr. Speaker, that they may have lost their value in terms of, you know, when you hear it. But when we say our children are our future, it's a scientific fact, because we live, we die, new generations emerge. And our responsibility for our children who come under our wing is to nurture, shape, and to prepare, not just to uphold the status quo, but to take us where we can't even imagine. And I've done a lot of reading assignments in schools, in several different public schools and one private school. And I am bowled over when I see the level of acute responsiveness, intelligence, energy. It's quite amazing. And it tells me that our premise is that our children are, in fact, the true promise of our country, and that perhaps their capacity is not even fully embraced or understood at this moment. But as we speak about the issue of children are our most vulnerable grouping, I think, in any society, because they're highly dependent, and also what we do speaks very loudly as to what they become. And so it's very important that our laws and our policies and our responses are shaped and measured in a way in which we are able to ensure the maximum performance and holistic, positive development of our young people. And in speaking about that, I wanted to use this opportunity to highlight one issue, my colleague from Southern Shores, and it's the issue of juvenile justice in this country. And I think it's an issue that it's one that I've spoken about for many years. I feel very strongly about. I've worked through the system. I remember once when I was involved in death penalty cases, there was a young man who his death warrant had been read. He was convicted just after his 18th birthday, and I became involved after the warrant. I was not involved in his trial or anything of that nature. But I knew him, and I was surprised because I remember going into juvenile court, and when I first went, he was like about 13 in there. I was hailing him. Then I went again, he was about 15. And I watched this young boy come through the juvenile system, and there he was, just after his 18th birthday on death row. And it spoke volumes. And the other problem that we have with juvenile justice is that many of our young people, younger offenders, who are not deemed suited or are just outside the age for the boys' industrial school or girls' industrial school, find themselves in Fox Hill Prison. And that's not something we need to be proud about. I think the time has now come that we look very seriously at this issue, because while we want to enhance the maximum performance of our young people, sometimes children grow up in very difficult circumstances, and when they become dysfunctional, they become the target of the state or the focus of the state. But a lot of times the origins are in the way in which they have been socialized. And so it becomes exacerbated when the system then further deviates from humane standards. I think that I want to encourage the member to look closely at this issue of juvenile justice, to see how children who are coming through the system, showing dysfunction, ending up in juvenile court, that we are able to intervene and manage and cause for these young people for their past to be corrected, or whatever support that's required, that they are given that support. Because sometimes they find themselves in circumstances that are probably close to nightmarish, and they act out in other ways. And so, but we are very proud that the Bahamas was very cognizant of the importance of our children and the necessity of protecting the interests and rights of children. I think we still have a way to go. And instead of just commemorating, I want to invite us to really commemorate it by taking a bold step forward in advancement in the protection of children in this particular area and in other areas. And I think yes, and the only other thing I would raise is that where we see deficits in the education system, in healthcare, in nutrition, that because children are the core of the future for our people, and we want to be better, not worse than we are now, that we concentrate in every institutional way to support, nurture, and develop our children so that they materialize in a way in which manifests the sacrifice of the ancestors. And so I commend the Department of Social Services for the work that they do. I know they know, but they're the social safety net. And so when people fall between the cracks and there's nothing, there's the Department of Social Services. And so That's something I think that we have to always remind ourselves, that we do have a social safety net in this country and nobody should fall by the wayside. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362, the Bahamas Registered Stock Direction 2019, Bahamas Registered Stock 2049.
Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Industrial Encouragement Approved Products Caribbean Block and Energy Limited Order 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Industries Encouragement Approved Manufacturers Caribbean Block and Energy Limited Order 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Price Control General Amendment Number 4, Regulations 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Harbor Dues Amendment Act 2019, Appointed Day Notice 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Nursing Council of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas financial statements for the year ended 31st of December 2017.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the Hospitals and Healthcare Facilities Licensing Board financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2017.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Elizabeth.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the Hospitals and Healthcare Facilities Licensing Board financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are no further laying of documents.
statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too would like to join with colleagues in congratulating our Hall of Famers, many of whom I am familiar with personally, and others who I would be familiar with as sporting legends and heroes. Sorry? Yeah, I was an athlete, you know. I always tell this story, and people don't believe me. Listen, I was, when I was 6 years old, the fastest 100-meter runner in Long Island. But unfortunately, there was only 5 of us, but still. But certainly, I think a lot has been said this morning about the power of sports and the mentorship that persons like those before us today would have provided to many, many of our so-called luminaries in our society today. Sports, more than anything, builds character and discipline, something that we need so much of in this country. And so I just want to thank them for their service in developing the youth and indeed helping to build the character of this country. And I'm sure those who were directly beneficiaries of your service would even be more so give testament to the impact that you've had upon their lives. As the member for Cat Island mentioned, my friend Ambrose Guthrow is not here today, but I would be remiss if I didn't shout out to him in particular, as whatever little bit of golf I know, he would have passed to me, and so I want to congratulate him, and again thank him for all he's doing to help the sport of golf and to support the young people in this country. Likewise, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to also pay congratulations to social services and their work with respect to children on this 30th anniversary of the rights of the child. Again, we know that there are so many children in our country that have less than the advantages that some of us may have enjoyed, and therefore have a very difficult start in life. And it is the support of agencies like social services that step into the breach, and we know all of the various homes and other non-governmental organizations that provide the tangible support to ensuring that these children have at least an opportunity to achieve their goals, desires, and all that they can be as Bahamian citizens. I know that the work of social services could never be truly compensated. And those of us who would have gone through Hurricane Dorian and the aftermath can certainly pay testament to the valuable work that they do. And I think all we can do, besides hopefully encouraging the minister to do the right thing with that little thing, as they say, is to say thank you. I'd also like to recognize, Mr. Speaker, in the gallery, 2 young ladies who I had the opportunity to meet, I think it was Monday, Jaden Kelly and Amani Davis. Stand up, ladies. These 2 young people are students, 12th grade students at Bahamas Academy, and they are doing their career, career week. And we had the privilege of having them at the Office of the Prime Minister, Office of the Deputy Prime Minister, the Parliamentary Secretary, just to have a chat. And I can join with the sentiments and comments of the member for Angliston in saying that this country, despite all the things that we promote and we put in the newspaper, this country is in good hands. These are some bright, bright students, and I want to congratulate them. full of innovation and thought. And they questioned me, and I questioned them, and I think we had a good time. So I just wanted to congratulate them and encourage them to continue to be inquisitive, continue to be focused, because the future is bright. And now, having said that, Mr. Speaker, I do want to recognize the good people of East Grand Bahama who give me this opportunity to be here as the Minister of Finance at this very, very difficult time. Indeed, we have gone through a lot, Mr. Speaker, and we have called upon the patience and the understanding, the commitment and resilience of all of the people who would have suffered through this catastrophic storm. The recovery is a difficult one. It is going to be a long one, unfortunately, and that brings with it many uncomfortable realities. Persons who are living in conditions that are less than they are accustomed to, and nonetheless persevering, picking up each day and moving one step forward. I want to assure them of our continued commitment to doing what we can to help to restore life as quickly as possible, restore their lives as quickly as possible. Mr. Speaker, it is my honor to make this communication this morning and to table the government's 2019 Fiscal Strategy Report, or FSR. As mandated by the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, the government is obligated to present the Fiscal Strategy Report to Parliament and the newly established Fiscal Responsibility Council by the third Wednesday of November, which is today. The Fiscal Strategy Report outlines the macroeconomic and fiscal outlook that will guide the framework for the upcoming budget, in this case being fiscal year 2020-2021, and the medium-term horizon. The context for this Fiscal Strategy Report is quite different from the previous one, as it comes on the heels of the strongest and most destructive storm ever recorded in the Atlantic Ocean, which in early September 2019 decimated parts of the northern Bahamas, leaving behind total damages, losses, and additional cost estimates at $3.4 billion. For context, Mr. Speaker, that is more than the losses for the last 3 hurricanes that the Bahamas has experienced. For the government, Hurricane Dorian has been a stark reminder of our vulnerability as an island nation to climate change. It is a reminder that the best of fiscal plans can be usurped by external factors outside of our control. The government's commitment to fiscal discipline has been steady and unquestionable. In the 2 years leading up to Hurricane Dorian, the government achieved success in its fiscal consolidation plans by reducing the deficit from $660 million in 2016-17 budget year to $212.8 million in fiscal year 2018-2019, the lowest deficit recorded in nearly a decade. It is clear that the impact of this monstrous and unprecedented hurricane will prevent the government from achieving the fiscal objective for the overall balance of 1% deficit to GDP for 2019-2020. And the deviation will exceed the 0.5% compliance margin allowed in the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2019. As such, the government is invoking the Exceptional Circumstances Clause 13, which allows for a temporary departure from the fiscal targets because of exceptional events. Under this clause, the Minister of Finance is mandated to bring to Parliament and the Fiscal Responsibility Council a fiscal adjustment plan, which should outline the reason for the departure from the fiscal targets which in this case is due to Hurricane Dorian. Measures to be taken to address the issues and a revised timeline for achieving compliance with the targets. Due to the timing of Hurricane Dorian, the government is presenting the fiscal adjustment plan within the 2019 Fiscal Strategy Report as permitted in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Mr. Speaker, the expenditure, revenue, and corresponding deficit targets for fiscal year 2019-2020 have been changed, given the additional costs associated with the provision of social assistance programs and restoration and reconstruction activity in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian. These direct expenditures are compounded by the estimated $236 million in revenue losses on accounts of the disruption in business activity on the affected islands of Abaco and Grand Bahama. As such, the projected revenue yield for 2019-2020 has been adjusted downward from the approved estimates of $2,628 million to $2,395.6 million. On the expenditure front, the government expects to spend an additional $182.7 million in hurricane-related outlays, of which $82.7 million will be used to facilitate recurrent expenses such as landfill operations for cleanup, food assistance programs, and unemployment benefits, among others. Capital expenditure is anticipated to increase by $100 million for hurricane initiatives, which will include the restoration of water and electricity in Abaco and Grand Bahama, the provision of temporary housing, vehicle replacement, and other repairs to critical infrastructure, such as hospitals and clinics on the storm-ridden islands. Mr. Speaker, the government has also identified several spending imperatives, aggregating nearly $120 million for fiscal year 2019-2020, which represents urgent priorities and are critical to stable governance of the public sector and the provision of much-needed infrastructure improvements. Thus, in total, aggregate expenditure is estimated to increase by $302.6 million in fiscal year 2019-2020 to $3,073.1 million as compared to the $2,765 million in the approved estimates. As a result, we now estimate the fiscal deficit to stand at $677.5 million, or 5.3% of GDP for fiscal year 2019-2020, compared with the approved estimates of $137 million, or 1% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, to finance the increased deficit position, the government will table new resolutions to Parliament for approval to borrow $507.9 million, which is the $540.5 million adjustment in the fiscal deficit for 2019-2020, net of the payouts from the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility of $12.9 million and the $20 million earmarked from the Extinguished Dormant Account Fund. Aside from the $100 million IDB contingent loan for natural disaster emergencies, which has already been approved by Parliament, the government intends to source funding from the domestic banks, which have already provided positive indications of their willingness to provide new credit facilities. The Caribbean Development Bank, which has given an initial loan amount indication of $50 million, and other offshore lending institutions. I wish to point out that the steps that the government has taken prior to the storm, over the opposition of some, to reestablish catastrophic insurance, to establish the IDB line of credit for disaster response, and the allowance to make use of extinguished funds from the dormant account, all of these have allowed the government to have the financial facilities to undertake urgent expenditure with little disruption to existing services. The legislative measures to fund the deficit will be tabled in approximately 2 weeks with a supplementary budget to address in an orderly and transparent manner the extraordinary expenditures and revenue losses associated with the passage of Hurricane Dorian, together with the identified pressing expenditure requirements to be met over the current budget and the medium-term fiscal horizon. Over the medium term, it is anticipated that Hurricane Dorian and other spending imperatives related costs will taper, allowing for lower deficits beginning in 2020-2021, which will see a reduction in the deficit to $498.9 million from the estimated $677.5 million, with further reductions occurring in 2021-22 to $301.2 million, and eventually to $82 million in fiscal year 2024-2025, when the government is expected to return to compliance with a deficit ratio of 0.5%. And how do we intend to do this? Well, Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian, the government has integrated into the current budget year and the medium term a number of policy initiatives that will serve to incentivize and ignite economic recovery and growth. Among these initiatives is the designation of the Special Economic Recovery Zone in Abaco and Grand Bahama, facilitating an extension in NIB unemployment benefit payments, invoking the exigency order, and injecting an additional $10 million in micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Furthermore, the foreign direct investment projects poised for Grand Bahama, such as the redevelopment of the Grand Lacaille property and the new cruise port, are anticipated to boost economic activity in the near term. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I wish to reiterate that the impact of Hurricane Dorian has imposed huge financial cost on the government, resulting in temporary deviation from the fiscal objectives in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. As a responsible government, we have devised several supportive initiatives important for the resumption of growth and employment in the affected islands of Abaco and Grand Bahama. With the measures I have outlined earlier, we now anticipate returning to fiscal compliance in fiscal year 2024-2025, which will allow the debt-GDP ratio to resume its downward trajectory towards the 50% target by fiscal year 2028-2029. And I want to reiterate, Mr. Speaker, that prior to this event, we were on track for our fiscal consolidation in 2024-2025, as had been outlined in our fiscal strategy and promised to the Bahamian people. Despite the impact that Hurricane Dorian has had on our nation, both socially and economically, we will not be derailed. The recovery of our people and our economy is a key priority of this administration, and we will continue to create policies that will be beneficial to the citizens of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Notwithstanding, we will remain committed to fiscal responsibility and to converging with the established fiscal objectives outlined in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We do not regard this experience with Hurricane Dorian as an opportunity to spend wildly, but to target our resources toward achieving enhanced macroeconomic resilience as we rebuild a better, stronger Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Further statements and communications by ministers.
This time.
Honourable Member, order that the document be brought up.
Thank you. And I am laying on the table of the House the 2019 Fiscal Strategy Report, as well as the communication.
Thank you.
I know, I see him.
Order that the documents so lie on the table.
I'm trying my best. You know, I'm trying my best.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores.
I beg leave, Mr. Speaker, to table as a communication the remarks I made earlier regarding the celebration of World Children's Day.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the document to lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further statements and communications by ministers. Mr. Speaker, the House will suspend for about 10 minutes so that members of this honorable chamber may be able to take a photograph with our inductees into the 2019 Sports Hall of Fame. So, Mr. Speaker, I feel like saying one or two things on the fact of my sports journey, but I will leave that for another day. But, Mr. Speaker, I will move at this time that the House do suspend for 10 minutes. I second that, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend for approximately 10 minutes. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended for approximately 10 minutes. Honorable members, when the business of this House suspended, we had concluded statements and communications by ministers, communications by the clerk, messages from the Governor General, messages from the Senate. Honorable members, I have in my possession 2 messages from the Honorable Senate, messages number 38 and message number 39. Number 38, a message to the Honorable Speaker and members of the Honorable House of Assembly from the Honorable President and Honorable members of the Senate. The Honorable Senate acquaints the Honorable House of Assembly that they have passed the following bill, accompanying message number 37, dated the 23rd of October, 2019, from the Honorable House of Assembly, having made the following amendments. And honorable members, those amendments will be considered when we arrive at consideration of Senate amendments on the agenda with respect to message number 38. Message number 39. Message to the Honorable Speaker and members of the Honorable House of Assembly from the Honorable President and Honorable members of the Senate. The Honorable Senate acquaints the Honorable House of Assembly that they have passed the following bill, accompanying message number 39, dated the 6th of November 2019, from the Honorable House of Assembly. A bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body corporate to be known as the Disaster Reconstruction Authority for the functions and powers related to that authority, for the designation of a disaster zone and a special economic recovery zone, and for connected purposes. Order that the messages will now lie on the table. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marathon.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to have read and debated for the second time the following bills. The Ministry of Environment Bill 2019, Environmental Planning and Protection Bill 2019, the Environmental Protection Control of Plastic Pollution Bill 2019, the Bahamas National Trust Amendment Bill 2019, the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund Amendment Bill 2019, the Tariff Amendment Number 2 Bill 2019.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, are you proposing to have those bills debated as a compendium of bills?
I am, Mr. Speaker.
And the lead bill is the first one that you...
Correct.
Right, okay. Could you just state the lead bill again for...
The lead bill is the Ministry of Environment Bill 2019.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, you can continue with the long title and then your presentation.
Yeah,
the long title.
For clarity, because I'm just not certain. The seconder will second after we're finishing.
Yes, after you've made your presentation.
Yeah. All right, well, no problem. So, Mr. Speaker, can you just hand me those bills? Like, you want me to read into the record the long title?
The long title of the first one.
The long title, Ministry of Environment Bill 2019, a bill for an act to establish the Ministry of the Environment to oversee the integrity of the environment of the Bahamas, to make the minister responsible therefore a corporation sole, to establish the Environmental Administration Fund and the Environmental Trust Fund, and for matters connected thereto.
Thank you, Honorable Member. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I would wish to thank the wonderful people of Marathon for giving me the opportunity of a lifetime, which is really to serve them. And serve them, we have been doing for the past 2.5 years, certainly to the best of our ability. Mr. Speaker, before I go down this road, Mr. Speaker, is it possible then to read the long titles of all of them, and so I can just go into my presentation, because they're all, I have a presentation prepared that takes into account everything.
Honorable Member.
With your leave, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member, we'll take them in stages after you've completed this one, because we need to just have one motion on the floor at a time. We'll deal with them individually as we go along. Yes.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay. Thank you for the clarity, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas is party to approximately 20 international agreements that deal with the environment and public welfare issues. The Bahamas is actively involved in the following conventions: the Ramsar Convention, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or the CITES Convention, the United Nations Convention on Laws of the Sea, UNCLOS. And despite this active involvement, Mr. Speaker, there remains only a few pieces of environmental national legislation to protect and preserve our natural environment. Mr. Speaker, on this day, this particular day in November, as the world is experiencing an environmental crisis of epic proportions, and indeed the Bahamas is, in a post-Hurricane Dorian world, I rise to commence the debate on 5 cornerstone pieces of environmental legislation that will protect our natural resources, create a planning regime for sustainable development of our environment, and hold offenders accountable for environmental infractions. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas is a coastal country with the entire population living within the coastal zone. Marine environments cover the greatest area of the Bahamas and provide for jobs, food, and recreational services. The livelihood of the majority of Bahamians is either directly or indirectly influenced by local environment, climate change, invasive species, pollution, and over-exploitation of our resources. All impacts of our economic and environmental sustainability are controlled by the coast. However, Mr. Speaker, when we understand that the environment and its resources form the foundation of our prosperity, we are better able to appreciate and protect this critical pillar of our existence. Out of all the threats identified, climate change is considered to have the greatest effect, as 80% of the Bahamas' landmass is within 1.5 meters or 5 foot of sea level, and 90% of the Bahamas' freshwater lenses are within 1.5 meters or 5 foot of the surface of the land. Therefore, both our land and freshwater resources are vulnerable and fragile to the impacts of climate change. The Environmental Planning and Protection Bill 2019, Mr. Speaker, establishes an integrated environmental management system, providing a legal framework for the protection, enhancement, and conservation of the environment, and for sustainable management, use, development, and enjoyment of the environment by the people of the Bahamas. In plain words, Mr. Speaker, this bill responds to the legislated vacuum in relation to environmental laws and brings clarity to the years of ambiguity as it relates to the enforcement of our environmental laws in the Bahamas. And further, Mr. Speaker, it centralizes the fragmented pieces of environmental legislation and brings cohesion to those that previously existed. Mr. Speaker, through the Environmental Planning and Protection Bill 2019, the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection will be established as a statutory entity with responsibilities for environmental protection. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, its functions shall include developing and implementing policies, programs, and plans for the effective management and conservation of the environment, educating and informing the public on the importance of protection of the environment, coordinating and implementing national protocols and treaties and agreements relating to environmental planning, and establishing procedures for environmental emergency preparedness and prevention in collaboration with other relevant stakeholders and government agencies. Mr. Speaker, the department will be outfitted with qualified young Bahamians, and this will be our focus. And they will act as environmental officers, and their responsibility would be, within the framework of the law, the preservation and conservation of our natural environment while researching and implementing projects to ensure the sustainable use of these resources. Mr. Speaker, in the Bahamas, the process associated with acquiring approvals to develop has long been a task. At times it's been confusing. Potential developers have had no clear roadmap as to what to do first or where to go next. The Environmental Planning and Protection Bill 2019 provides much needed clarity and transparency to the environmental impact assessment process. Mr. Speaker, the bill clearly outlines which project will be subject to the EIA process and which ones will not. It outlines the process for engagement with the government, and more importantly, Mr. Speaker, the bill specifically states that no approval or other documentary authorization shall be granted for any project that has the potential to have an adverse effect on the environment due to its nature, size, complexity, or location, unless a certificate of environmental clearance has been issued. This certificate will outline the requirements consisting of environmental mitigation and management measures, including monitoring requirements and a proposed project before the proposed project can proceed. Mr. Speaker, we are inextricably linked to our environment. The certificate of environmental clearance provides us with an avenue for protection. However, the bill speaks directly to the protection of our natural resources. This bill provides for the protection of coral reefs in the Bahamas, our most precious resource, as it is our first defense against the winds and storm surges associated with hurricanes. Mr. Speaker, coral reefs also provide a habitat and shelter for those marine organisms that we love to eat. And it's an important part of our social culture and forms the fabric of our everyday life. Coral reefs have been described as the rainforest of the sea, providing protection on land from erosion and loss of life. Mr. Speaker, this bill creates an avenue for the government to recover monies for compensation in respect of any action or suit initiated for the damage to a coral reef from the owner of a vessel that has run aground, struck or otherwise damaged coral reef systems and ecosystems. This bill allows for the government to prohibit or restrict, either indefinitely or for a period of time, any hunting, removal of any plant or animal, and to declare any area or living species within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas as environmentally sensitive. Mr. Speaker, this bill allows for a quick response to environmental incidents and disease outbreak and efforts to preserve biodiversity. In addition to these already groundbreaking environmental components, Mr. Speaker, this bill creates a coordinated governmental response to spills and accidental releases of pollutants into the environment. The bill speaks directly to the prohibition of or discharge of any hazardous substance, chemical, oil, or mixture containing oil into waters or segment of the environment. Mr. Speaker, in the event of an accidental discharge, recovery measures are put in place under this bill that would restore the environment as close to its pre-existing state and penalizes offenders commensurate with the environmental infraction. Mr. Speaker, accompanying this robust piece of legislation is a series of fines and penalties that can be levied on environmental offenders, where the fine or penalty is directly or proportionate to the environmental infraction. These fines range from $500 for individuals on summary charges, that's $5,000, I'm sorry, for individuals on summary charges, to $30 million or jail time for indictable charges, Mr. Speaker. I repeat, they range on summary conviction from $5,000 and on indictable convictions to $30 million, or to 3 times the assessed value of the damage caused, whichever is greater, or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 10 years, or to both. Mr. Speaker, accompanying this legislation is the Ministry of Environment Bill 2019, which I read the long title. This establishes the Ministry of Environment as a statutory entity within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the minister as a corporation sole with powers to acquire, hold, lease, and dispose of property of any description and to enter into contracts and to sue and be sued. Mr. Speaker, the ministry will be responsible for 2 new funds. The Environmental Administration Fund. This is a fund where fines and levies will be deposited into, in addition to bonds held for developers. Monies will be used to restore and enhance the environment, implement measures to reduce environmental pollution, and refund developers for sums deposited into it. The second fund is the Environmental Trust Fund, Mr. Speaker. This is different in nature from the Administration Fund in that it is under the general control of a board of trustees. And the purpose of this is to secure grants and donations from donor agencies unwilling to give monies to go into national consolidated funds of government. This portion of the bill fills a funding gap and allows for the Bahamas to take advantage of the grant opportunities that are out there that we would not otherwise benefit from, and is certainly of critical importance in a post-Dorian era when it will take grant funding to rebuild our country. Mr. Speaker, through the use of both funds, the Bahamas will now have access to a broader range of funding opportunities to fulfill our national and international obligations and agreements, conduct project activities, establish environmental programs, and acquire consultancy services as needed. Mr. Speaker, to ensure transparency and accountability, the legislation requires that a report on both funds be tabled in this honorable House annually, and both funds are also subject to internal and external auditing. Turn my attention now, Mr. Speaker, to the Environmental Protection, Control of Plastic Pollution Bill 2019. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas is a delicate country with an extensive marine environment that is fundamental to our health and economy. For decades, Mr. Speaker, human activities have negatively impacted the marine environment, resulting in the death of coral reefs, the collapse of fish populations, and marine pollution. Like many other countries, the Bahamas has an exacerbating plastic pollution issue, a problem that holds significant environmental, and economic costs. Mr. Speaker, a study conducted by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation found that at least 8 million tons of plastic waste ends up in the world's oceans each year and will remain there for a century. By 2025, Mr. Speaker, it is projected that there will be 1 ton of plastic for every 3 tons of fish, with plastic trash eventually outweighing fish in our oceans. Mr. Speaker, in the first quarter of 2018, the Prime Minister of the Bahamas announced during the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that the Bahamas would impose a ban on selected single-use plastic products to come into effect by 2020. My ministry immediately formed a task force and began the interaction with stakeholders across the country to devise a plan for the successful implementation of a ban. Mr. Speaker, the successful implementation of this ban is crucial for a number of reasons, which I will outline. Plastics not only pollute our water, but they also pollute our land. Plastics are usually lightweight, and as such, they can travel very, very long distances by either water or wind. The windblown products and windblown plastic trashes entire areas, fields. These litters can get caught up between trees, fences, and of course they float on water and can be traveled and carried by currents. Eventually our oceans get polluted. Plastics break down into microplastics. It enters our food chain through marine organisms, and we in turn eat the fish that eat the fish that eat the plastics. Second point, Mr. Speaker, plastics are a byproduct of the fossil fuel industry. These non-renewable resources account for as much as climate change in the globe, and certainly as we've experienced in the post-Hurricane Dorian world. Most of plastic is made from polypropylene, which is a material manufactured from petroleum and natural gas. All of the materials are non-renewable fossil fuel or fossil fuel-based materials through their extraction. And in their production and creation, greenhouse gases are emitted, which contributes, of course, to the whole global warming effect. Third point is that chemical leaching from polystyrene food products have been linked to acute health effects, and with the Bahamas having some of the highest incidence of cancer in the world, in both men and women, we have a moral responsibility to take the actions where appropriate, Mr. Speaker. The fourth, a survey done by the Ministry of Tourism found that 70% of our visitors come to the Bahamas for our beaches. However, the Bahamas Plastic Movement estimates that if the rate of plastic pollution on beaches increases, it can cause up to $8.5 million in tourist losses annually for the country. Thus, the country has an urgent need to grapple with this situation. Mr. Speaker, the enactment of this legislation, the government will completely ban the importation, distribution, manufacture, possession, sale, and use of single-use plastics such as shopping bags, food utensils, forks, knives, and spoons, straws, and polystyrene food containers throughout the Bahamas by 2020. In addition to this, Mr. Speaker, the release of balloons into the atmosphere will also be prohibited. They invariably end up in the ocean, get mistaken for food, and enter into the food chain, and they themselves break down into microplastics. As of January 1st, 2020, these items will have become known as the Forbidden Four. And they were primarily selected because there are readily available alternatives that currently exist on the market, and because of the frequent interactions that a typical person can have with them on a daily basis, which we don't even think about. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, just think about how you eat, and what the containers are in. Mr. Speaker, this ban will reduce human health impacts associated with plastic litter and polystyrene chemicals, and reduce the presence of litter within our communities and the marine environment, reduce waste sent to the landfill, and reduce the incidence of marine species entangled, marine species that ingest, and marine species that are suffocated by plastics. Mr. Speaker, the dedicated staff of the Ministry of Environment have been actively working to spread the message about the upcoming ban across the archipelago since its announcement in 2018. They've been on the ground actively meeting with businesses, small groups, corporate partners, church groups, community groups, civil society groups, NGOs, individual Bahamian citizens on the implications of the ban. Education about the alternatives to the forbidden 4 items and providing the proposed alternatives free of charge, Mr. Speaker. We've held several major town meetings across New Providence, Abaco, and Grand Bahama, and tomorrow the team will be in Andros. Following this, they'll be in Eleuthera on November 25th and Exuma on December 2nd. The public education and outreach campaign will continue through June of 2020 to ensure that we have covered the entire length and breadth of the country multiple times. Mr. Speaker, to aid in the transition process, the legislation permits businesses to use compostable bags that will meet the approved standards for a period of 2 years. Businesses will be required to sell these bags for no less than 25 cents and no more than $1. The fee shall be retained by the business establishment. However, the fee must be separately stated on the receipt. Further to this, upon the enactment of the legislation on the 1st of January 2020, businesses will have a 6-month period of transition, which allows them to sell existing stocks. Any person who commits an offense under this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, will be liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $5,000 and a term of imprisonment not exceeding 6 months, or to both. This legislation will give power to environmental monitors and relevant personnel to inspect the premises of a business establishment to ensure compliance. This again opens the door for employment of more young Bahamians to act as environmental monitors. I'll turn my attention to the Tariff Amendment Number 2 Bill 2019, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ushering in the ban and to ease the economic implications associated with the alternative products, I'm pleased to announce that the tariff bill has been amended. This amendment was done to incorporate new codes for items that had previously had none, and to adjust the duty on all the alternative products to the forbidden 4 items, making them duty-free. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to the Bahamas National Trust Amendment Bill 2019. The Bahamas National Trust, the Act was amended, the Bahamas National Trust Act was amended in 2010, and was amended to define the advisory function of the Bahamas National Trust with respect to the government and private sector, to diversify and expand membership categories, to revise the management of the Council of the Bahamas National Trust, to clarify the powers of wardens to enforce the bylaws within the Bahamas National Trust properties, and to empower the Bahamas National Trust to revoke or alter bylaws prohibiting the use of fireworks, which have long been a potential to disturb wildlife. After the operationalization of the 2010 Bahamas National Trust Amendment Act, it became apparent that an amendment or further amendment was necessary to correct some drafting errors that crept in. And it resulted in the organization being unable to elect the requisite number of council members. It was recommended by the Attorney General's office that instead of inserting a complicated formula into the Act be amended to allow for the formula for election of council members. This formula will be determined by the council by resolution, and this would avoid having to amend the Act in the future if the Bahamas National Trust had a desire to change the formula and the term limits, etc., of elected council members. In short, it helps them to operate more efficiently. Further review identified other points to be included in the amendment, which were included, Mr. Speaker. The second and most significant change relates to the very important enforcement and management tool of issuing spot fines in national parks. As it stands, for any offense committed in the national parks, the requirement is that the alleged offender be taken to the nearest police station to be charged, and then offenders must be processed through the court system. Mr. Speaker, this is found to be impractical and over-encumbering. When trying to enforce regulations, it's particularly in some of our national parks, which tend to be isolated. Consider the example of a vessel or a park user if they're found committing a minor offense in the Exuma Land and Sea Park, such as speeding through a no-wake zone, or having fishing lines out, not having caught fish. In such cases, the only prosecution option, Mr. Speaker, would be to take that vessel 50 to 70 miles away to be processed in Nassau or Exuma. This literally involves days of time of the Bahamas National Trust, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and police, as well as the court's time to process a minor offense. It could also involve taking into custody and being responsible for multi-million-dollar vessels that cruise throughout our country. Until this matter is resolved in the courts, imposing onerous liability on the Bahamas National Trust. We use guidance in formulating this, Mr. Speaker, from the Road Traffic Act, where spot fines can be issued. This amendment will insert a new section into the Principal Act to allow officers or wardens to issue written penalty notices to persons committing offenses within any national park. This clause further provides that the penalty payable shall be prescribed under bylaws and stipulates the relevant procedure. Persons would then have a certain time to pay their fine to the government at prescribed locations. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund Amendment Bill 2019. The Bahamas Protected Areas Fund is requesting this amendment to the BPAF Act, as it's called, 2014, to facilitate the signing of partnership agreements with the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. Thereby they can have access to this 4.25 million fund, and that is the amount earmarked for the Bahamas, 4.25 million. The Board of BPAF, or the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund, has had extensive discussions with the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund as to the required amendment, and it has approved the draft proposed amendments which were submitted to the government for its consideration. The key inhibitor to the signing of the partnership agreements relates to the perceived lack of independence of the board, primarily its composition, powers, and civil society member selection process. Several provisions of the Act are contrary to international best practices for effective governance of national conservation trust funds, thereby not allowing or preventing BPAF from accessing the $4.25 million. BPAF's greatest delay in the signing of the partnership agreements prevents access to the funds held by the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund and limits donations from other regional and international bodies whose mandate require independent boards. These bills comprehensively address the need for a positive framework for the interaction with our environment. Taken as a whole, they create opportunities for employment and entrepreneurship. They provide accountability, transparency where there was none. They create clarity where confusion was once the order of the day. They secure pathways for continuing international engagement and improve access to funding. This suite of legislation, Mr. Speaker, indicates to the world that the Bahamas is ready, willing, and able to rise to the challenge, to meet our international commitments, and be a force for good for the preservation of our global commons. Mr. Speaker, this is done so all the while sustainably developing our national resources and maintaining environmental integrity and creating economic opportunities for Bahamian citizens and residents alike. Mr. Speaker, with that I close, and Marathon supports the compendium of bills.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Tall Pines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't expecting the minister to finish so quickly. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to be here this morning to represent and the second this compendium of bills, environmental bills, namely the Environmental Protection Control of Plastic Pollution Bill 2019, the Ministry of Environment Bill 2019, the Environmental Planning and Protection Bill of 2019, the Bahamas Protected Area Funds Amendment Bill 2019, the Bahamas National Trust Amendment Bill 2019, and the Tariff Amendment Number 2 Bill of 2019. Mr. Speaker, I wish to, on behalf of the people of Tall Pines,
also congratulate our Hall of Famers this evening. But also, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage them to continue to work with our young people in the Bahamas to become heroes like they are today. Mr. Speaker, I wish Bahamians, if they do have a copy still of the speech from the throne given on the 24th of May 2017 by Dame Margaret. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, begin this contribution by seconding these bills by reminding the people of the Bahamas what this government committed to. And I quote, Mr. Speaker, and I'm quoting Dame Margaret, the former Governor General. Mr. Speaker, members of this Honorable House of Assembly, a clean environment results in a healthy nation. It is our duty to enable a clean environment for daily living and to develop and protect our surroundings for future generations. My government, I quote, will enact legislation to expand the responsibility of the Ministry of the Environment to coordinate all national and international environmental obligation activities. I quote, my government will set up a mechanism to respond to the environmental incidents and agencies and introduce liabilities of persons or institutions polluting our environment. My government will focus on the remediation of the New Providence landfill to maximize fires, Mr. Speaker. I begin there, Mr. Speaker, because I want the Bahamian people to once more remember that this F&M government, Mr. Speaker, this F&M government takes a different attitude to the environment. This F&M government, Mr. Speaker, takes a totally different position when it comes to the environment, Mr. Speaker. And as the Member of Parliament for Torrey Pines, I have to be proud, Mr. Speaker. I have to be proud of this F&M government. Mr. Speaker, when we talk about working with our departments and agencies and other stakeholders about building a stronger and more healthy Bahamas, this F&M government, this Prime Minister, and this member for Marathon and the Minister responsible for environment, they just don't talk, Mr. Speaker. This is the before and after picture of what the landfill looked like. This is the before and after picture of what was experienced in Torrey Pines. But because we take the environment so serious, and because we did not just promise, Mr. Speaker, but we delivered. And so I want the Bahamas, as we look at these bills, to remember that this F&M government, we don't just talk, Mr. Speaker, we do. And Torrey Pines is evidence of that. Mr. Speaker, I think that was an important position to begin on. Mr. Speaker, because the Minister for Marathon and the Minister of the Environment and Housing, he was elaborating and explaining the bills, Mr. Speaker, and I would just quickly go through some of the sections again and put emphasis on some of the areas that I think the Bahamian people need to really understand. Mr. Speaker, secondly, Mr. Speaker, I want to remind the Bahamian people that this F&M government, as we did with these particular bills, that we remain transparent. And as I was researching these bills and researching what we've done in the past, the environment, I was able to, Mr. Speaker, find these bills on the internet, the Attorney General's office, where it was shown to Bahamians for them to be able to give their contribution, to review them. And I invite Bahamians not only to review these bills, but to continue to review the bills we put out there, because we are a transparent government. We want your input. And because of your input, this government was able to put this cocktails of bills together that advance our compendium cocktail. Some people might say some people say a conch salad. But Mr. Speaker, these are bills. This compendium, Mr. Speaker, are bills to speak to what's important to us, the environment. Not only for Bahamians, Mr. Speaker, we talk about our tourist product. We invite millions and millions of tourists here every day, and as the minister said, most of them come to enjoy our seas. Most of them come to enjoy our forestry. And just last week, I was privileged to travel to North Andros with the member for North Andros and the Berry Islands. And we took the opportunity to go through a street off the San Andres Drive where there's a blue hole. And I was amazed, Mr. Speaker, at our forestry and what it presents to not only us as Bahamians, but what it presents to those persons who come from around the world to see what we have in the Bahamas. And this is why these bills are so important for our nation. And this is why these bills are so important for the people of San Andres and the people of Tall Pines and the people of South Andres. I saw the member for South Andres there also when we signed the contract for the bridge there in Central Andres. And I saw the beauty of Central Andres, and I saw the beauty of Central Andres and how magnificent our blue holes are, how magnificent our mangroves are, how magnificent our environment is. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I'm so proud on behalf of the people of Tall Pines to stand here and to second these bills, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, I talk about Tall Pines in the landfill, but, you know, we were also able to fix the emissions of oil at Clifton Pier. We're able to do so much other things, Mr. Speaker, to better environment. And so, if I may, Speaker, not necessarily in the order that the minister took us through, but I wish to first look at the Environmental Protection Control of Plastic Pollution Bill 2019. Now, Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to prohibit single-use plastic foodware and non-biodegradable, oxy-biodegradable, and biodegradable single-use plastic bags, and to prohibit the release of balloons, and to regulate the use of composable single-use plastic bags, Mr. Speaker. Now, it's important for Bahamians to know, Mr. Speaker, that there are 4 items that are banned. Plastic bags at the point of sale, plastic food utensils such as spoons, knives, and forks, plastic straws. And I was amazed, I was in Canada the other day, Mr. Speaker, and every restaurant I went in, all use cardboard. You say cardboard straws, you say in the Bahamas. But I could not find plastic straw. And I'm glad that we're moving in that direction, Mr. Speaker. Also, styrofoam cups and food containers for those toters out there. I say that respectfully. There will be no more styrofoam bowls. And the furl paper, you might have to resort to that. I don't think we've banned that yet. But, Mr. Speaker, we want to be able, they say the furl paper or the foil paper is recyclable. But, Mr. Speaker, they are now banned. The public should note, Mr. Speaker, that with the exceptions of composable bags that will be allowed until 2022, Clause 1 of this bill notes that the effective date of the commencement is January the 1st, 2020. Mr. Speaker, I was, the minister spoke about the fact that there'll be costs for the bags now going into food stores and other stores from 25 cents to $1. And the establishment is to collect this at the checkout. Speaker, but what is good about this bill is for businesses and consumers is that the fact that there's a transition period. And they are set up in Section 14 of the bill. And so businesses will be allowed 6 months to deplete their stocks before being fined and penalized. And just last night when I was at my Tall Pines executive meeting, Ms. Davis, one of my members, she asked, I heard that you're bringing this bill and you're going to fine people for having plastic. And I was like, I want you to listen, and I want the Bahamian people to listen, so that in January you can't say that you didn't know. And I want to put some emphasis on this aspect of the bill. Fines range from $1,000 to $5,000. Fines on summary offenses, which simply means summary offenses means that it's heard before a single magistrate. It's not considered a very serious offense, but we take it serious. So fines on a summary offense for balloons, A person for the first time, the hymn is listed, a person, first time, fined up to $2,000 for releasing the balloons. A second time or more, up to $3,000. For businesses, Mr. Speaker, the fine can go up to $5,000. There's similar offense where you cause or permit the release. Again, a person is fined for the first time up to $2,000. The second time, up to $4,000. And for businesses, up to $5,000. Fines for non-biodegradable, oxy-biodegradable, or biodegradable single-use bags. Again, Mr. Speaker, for the first time, your first offense, up to $2,000. And if you continuously do it over a period of time, the sum of $5,000 per day or part thereof. And for your second offense, up to $3,000. And if continuous, $700 per day or part thereof. And so I want the Bahamian people to think about those numbers. So what we're trying to say to you is that as we try to help you, try help yourself by not breaching or breaking the law. Save that $3,000. Don't be placed before the courts. Now, Mr. Speaker, this bill places fines and for persons who may try to assault, because we have officers who's going to be who may enforcing these fines or the laws relating to this bill. So if you find assaulting these officers, obstructing them from carrying out their duties, or misleading, or giving false statements, in essence, Mr. Speaker, if you lie to them, any inspector, you could be fined up to $5,000. I want the Bahamian people to understand the dollar figures. And so we want to show you how serious we are. You could be fined up to $5,000. Or, if you don't want to pay the fine, you have the option. You can spend 6 years in jail. Or, both. Fine up to $5,000 and spend 6 years in the good member for Fox Hills constituency at Her Majesty's prison. I know she don't want anybody else there in Fox Hill, and quite frankly, this government, we don't want anybody here. We want you to adhere to these laws because we're trying to build a better, safer, cleaner Bahamas. And that is what these bills are all about. The Department of Corrections. Sorry. We want to remove that stigma from Fox Hill. The Bahamas, correct, what's the name? The Bahamas Department of Corrections. And then, Mr. Speaker, there's the Tariff Amendment Bill.
Honorable member, then I will order that the reference to Fox Hill be expunged from the record.
I'm obliged, Mr. Speaker. I'm guided. Mr. Speaker, this amendment bill simply makes various amendments to the Tariff Act as a result of that particular bill I just mentioned, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, the third bill is the Bahamas National Trust Amendment Bill 2019. The Speaker, the primary objectives of this bill is to amend the substantive Bahamas Trust Act, Chapter 391. It firstly expands the duties of the trust, as the minister alluded to. Secondly, it revises the constitution of the council, as the member and the minister alluded to. Thirdly, it expands the authorized capital investment of the fund. Mr. Speaker, we know that these organizations, they strive on tax exemptions. And so this bill adds VAT exemption to the categories of exemptions on real property as it relates to the National Trust. As it relates to the amendment to the National Trust, also, Mr. Speaker, it's important to note that it introduced, as the minister notes, sport fines, that is to be issued by the officers and wardens. Speaker, as the minister said, these fines are in line with, and the collection are in line with how we issue road traffic tickets. So what happens is, instead of pulling you before the courts, we could issue you a ticket, and if you don't wish to challenge, you could just pay it. And so this is reducing the administrative cost of the trust, and it improves collection of fees for the trust. The Speaker, the Bahamas Protected Area Fund Amendment Bill 2019. The bill primarily seeks to amend the Bahamas Protected Area Fund Act of 2014, and it adds strengths to the provisions of the act, which will cause the funds to operate more effectively and efficiently in today's Bahamas. Speaker, this act, or this fund, is a critical source of long-term and reliable financing to support our national or natural protected area systems, which provides numerous economic benefits and services to our tourist-based economy, such as Clifton Heritage Park, our protected fisheries resources, our protected wildlife and bird resources, our protected forestry, and other areas owned and managed by the Bahamas Trust. And so, Mr. Speaker, this bill, for example, expands the list of areas protected under the Principal Act. As alluded to and spoken about by the minister, this bill assists us in getting funds from the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. And that's so important, Mr. Speaker. At this time, we have access to $4.2 million, or we have access to that, and this bill, this amendment would now allow us to gain access to those funds. And so our mangroves and our environment that was affected by the last hurricane in Albacoa, affected in East Grand Bahama, Mr. Speaker, we have access to those funds now because of this amendment to go and help rebuild those resources, Speaker. And other areas where resources are needed to protect our environment. Now, Mr. Speaker, the last two bills, which I think are the more substantive, important ones, the Ministry of Environment Bill 2019. This bill, Mr. Speaker, seeks to establish the Ministry of the Environment, which will have the task of overseeing the integrity of the Bahamas' environment. The Ministry of the Environment. We said during our campaign, Mr. Speaker, that we will introduce or establish a Ministry of the Environment. And would also, Mr. Speaker, now make provisions for the minister to be a corporation sole. It establishes the Environmental Administration Fund and the Environmental Trust Fund. Now, Mr. Speaker, a sole corporate, for those who might not know, is an individual person who represents an official position which has a single separate legal entity or corporation sole, and this corporation sole can only be created by statute. And so the minister is tasked with providing insight in how the organization, the Ministry of the Environment, acts upon its perceived purpose, values, strategies, and goals. And so the bill makes clear in Clause 4 and 5 the functions and responsibilities of the minister, which include protecting, managing, and conserving all land, water, air, and living resources of the Bahamas for the environmental, economic, and social benefit, Mr. Speaker, of our friends in Torrey Pines, our friends in Cat Island, and our friends throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so he does take the responsibility, and he's in charge of the environmental health services, the National Geographic Information Services, the public beach and parks, the scientific research that's in our country, reviewing environmental impact assessments, etc. And so the minister shall promote environmental sustainability. And so this is why this is so important when we talk about what we're able to do in Torrey Pines with the landfill. And this is why this is so important what we'll be able to do in Clifton, because he now has the responsibility of promoting environmentally sound, sustainable policies for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And Mr. Speaker, he or she shall maintain relations with national, regional, and international organizations for the purpose of developing environmental policies for the benefit of every single Bahamian. Speaker, as the minister spoke to, Clause 8 calls for the establishment of the Environmental Administration Fund. Mr. Speaker, this fund receives funds from this parliament, this budget, from developers, bonds from developers, impositions and collections of taxes and fines whenever we do collect fines. And these funds, Mr. Speaker, are used to restore and enhance the environment, used to implement measures to reduce environmental pollution, and to reimburse developers whenever the sums are to be redeposited to them. And only when, Mr. Speaker, the sums are to be paid back to them. Because we know, Mr. Speaker, in this country, sometimes developers, they breach our policies. And I hope that this ministry and this minister will be very strict when those breaches occur and hold those bonds and then use those bonds to work for the betterment of our environment. The Speaker, Clause 10 of the bill likewise calls for the establishment of the Environmental Trust Fund, which is to be managed and controlled by a board of trustees, whose functions and powers are outlined in Clause 12 of the bill. The funds Mr. Speaker, has to continuously be maintained and sustained. Speaker, there is a very important, we have to mention, Mr. Speaker, that there will be proper counting of these funds, and they will be subject to internal and external and independent audits. And as the minister said, they would have to report to this House on those funds. Mr. Speaker, the final bill, the Environmental Planning and Protection Bill, it seeks to establish the Department of the Environmental Planning and Protection. It further provides for the prevention or control of pollution. It regulates environmental activities, administration, conservation, and sustainable use of the environment. And Mr. Speaker, in order to carry out these aims, it calls for the appointment of a director, a deputy director, an assistant director of environmental planning and protection, and the establishment of an integrated environmental management system, which ensures the proper legal framework, that ensures that the proper legal framework is in place for the protection of our environment. And that's very important. We need the proper legal framework in place in order for these agencies to function properly and to work for our benefit. And so clear regulations of activities are set out in this regard. Protocols are in place, Mr. Speaker. And as the minister noted, there's now a certificate of environmental clearance in Clause 11. And so one has to secure that certificate whenever they engage in any projects that may affect the environment. And there are clearance conditions. There are clearance conditions. I'll yield to the member for Bamboo Town, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do move that the business of this House to continue beyond 1 p.m. so that the member can finish. I think he has probably another 5 to 7 minutes, and so we will give the honorable member that opportunity.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House to extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House will extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Tall Pines.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. As noted, Mr. Speaker, this section, obviously, Mr. Speaker, gives powers to the minister to carry out his responsibilities to protect our forestries, our water, and other environmental areas of concern to us. Mr. Speaker, the minister spoke about the natural resources that's protected, the pollution control that this bill speaks to, the hazardous substance and hazardous waste issues that this bill speaks to in terms of being protected by the relevant agencies. Speaker, this bill also addresses spills, accidental release, and environmental restoration. And so this is very important, Mr. Speaker. So now there are control mechanisms in place whereby companies and individuals have to have in place an environmental contingency plan case something goes wrong. They have to have a plan in place so that they could restore the environment. We have to know that what plans they have in place, if something happens, how they respond and how they fix it. I know that's a term that our opposition likes to use, but I think that's something that we all should use when it comes to this bill. These individuals, these companies have to be forced legally to fix it when they ruin and damage our environment. And this bill, Mr. Speaker, speaks to that. It obviously addresses compliance and enforcement, Mr. Speaker. The minister spoke to that adequately. I think that we want to empower our inspectors, empower our officers to be able to ensure that the laws are being fulfilled or carried out. Mr. Speaker, before concluding, Mr. Speaker, I did have the big sign there. So I'm going to put the small one here as I conclude. That one doesn't hide. Speaker, it's another before and after picture from the landfill. Because when I addressed and when I looked at this bill, or these bills, it just reminded me, Mr. Speaker, it reminded me of just 3 years ago when my people in Tall Pines went through the hardship of an experience because we neglected or we failed to put in place measures that were adequate to protect our environment. And today, because of this F&M government, because, Mr. Speaker, I went on the streets and I promised them, especially after hearing the Pan American Health Organization report following that fire about the hazard, the air pollution in Jubilee Gardens and Victoria Gardens, Fire Trail Road, and in fact, Mr. Speaker, throughout New Providence, when we heard of the dangers that our people in Tall Pines, the dangers that our people throughout Nassau was exposed to, this F&M government said that we are going to make a move, we're going to take a stance, we're going to fix the landfill. And today, Mr. Speaker, I'm so proud to say that we have fixed the landfill, Mr. Speaker. The New Providence Ecological Park is doing a wonderful job, a 360-degree turn. And now persons in Tall Pines can breathe better. They can enjoy their homes. They're not afraid now of their home values being depreciated. Now, I would argue, Mr. Speaker, when the mini golf course and the parks are built, that maybe their properties will increase in value. They would now enjoy their communities. And I'm so proud that this Prime Minister, this Minister of the Environment, took the leadership. And I was so happy to be with them, to say to the people of Tall Pines and say to the people of New Providence that we take the environment serious. And these bills, Mr. Speaker, shows that we take the environment serious. These bills, Mr. Speaker, show that we care about the air that we breathe in the Bahamas. These bills, Mr. Speaker, show that we care about our waters. The hundreds and thousands of cruise ships that pass through our waters, that now we're going to protect our waters. We're going to protect the greenlands of this country and the animals that live in those greenlands. Speaker, for those reasons, this member for Tall Pines, I'm proud, I'm happy to support the 6 bills before the House. I think the 5 bills before the House, Speaker. The 5 bills, Mr. Speaker, because it makes for safer Bahamas. It makes for more environmentally sound Bahamas. I'm proud of this Prime Minister. I'm proud of this Minister of the Environment. Tall Pines supports and Tall Pines second these bills, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable members. Just for the record, honorable members, I am in possession of 6 bills. The principal one being the Ministry of the Environment Bill 2019. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to establish the Ministry of the Environment to oversee the integrity of the environment of the Bahamas, to make the minister responsible, therefore, a corporation sole, to establish the Environmental Administration Fund and the Environmental Trust Fund, and for matters connected thereto. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Mangrove Key, South and Central Andros. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, we're going to now take our luncheon break, so I do move that the House suspends until 3 p.m. today.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.